Once upon a time in the bustling city of Aurelia, a modest couple named Ada and Izzy lived in a small, tidy apartment in the heart of the city. Izzy was a hard-working man who loved his wife deeply and cherished their little family. Ada, on the other hand, was a woman of secrets. Unknown to Izzy, Ada was a billionaire with a sprawling business empire that included real estate, tech startups, and high-end retail stores. But she had hidden her wealth so well that even Izzy believed they were an average, struggling family. Their life seemed perfect on the surface until tragedy struck their home. Their 6-year-old son, Yuke, was diagnosed with kidney failure. The doctors were clear. Yuke needed a kidney transplant immediately, and the surgery had to be performed abroad. The cost was astronomical, far beyond what Izzy could afford. One night, as they sat at the dinner table, Izzy broached the topic, his voice heavy with worry. "Ada, I've been thinking about Yuke's treatment. We'll need to sell the car, maybe even the house. We have to find the money somehow." Ada lowered her eyes, her spoon clinking softly against the bowl. "Izzy, I don't have anything to give. My salary barely covers our bills." Izzy stared at her, stunned. "Nothing? Ada, this is our son's life we're talking about." Her silence was deafening. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Cars honking, street vendors shouting, and neon lights flickering in the night. But inside their small apartment, a storm was brewing. Izzy could not fathom how the woman he loved so deeply could remain so detached in their darkest hour. Ada sneaks out of the house late at night, heading to a luxury hotel in the heart of the city. She steps out of a sleek, black car, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. She enters a private elevator, her expression unreadable. Who is Ada, and what is she hiding? The morning sun filtered through the curtains of their modest apartment, casting long shadows on the worn wooden floor. Izzy sat by the window, his head buried in his hands. He hadn't slept all night. The thought of his son's failing health gnawed at him, and Ada's cold refusal to help only deepened his despair. How could she say she had nothing to give? Izzy shook his head, trying to push the thought away. Ada had always been a simple, practical woman. Perhaps she truly had no money saved. He had to focus on what he could do. He stood up, ran his fingers through his disheveled hair, and prepared for another day of work. But before he left, he peeked into Yuke's room. The boy lay on his small bed, his face pale, with dark circles under his eyes. Yuke stirred and looked up, his small voice breaking the silence. "Papa, will I be okay?" Izzy forced a smile, kneeling by the bed. "Of course, my boy. You're strong, just like your papa. Promise?" Yuke whispered, his tiny hand gripping Izzy's. "Promise." Izzy swallowed the lump in his throat as he kissed Yuke's forehead. He couldn't fail him, not now, not ever. The streets of Aurelia were alive with activity as Izzy navigated through the crowds. The city was a blend of wealth and poverty, where glass skyscrapers towered over crumbling brick buildings. Izzy worked as a delivery driver during the day and as a janitor at night, hustling tirelessly to make ends meet. His first stop of the day was at a cafe in the upscale part of town. The gleaming silver counters and polished floors were a stark contrast to his own home. As he waited for the manager to sign off on a package, Izzy overheard two businessmen chatting at a nearby table. "Did you hear about the new real estate deal? Ada Investments bought the entire block downtown. She's making waves again," one of them said, sipping his coffee. Izzy's ears perked up. Ada Investments? The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. He dismissed it as a coincidence and went back to his work. By lunchtime, he was exhausted. He sat on a bench near the park, pulling out a sandwich from his bag. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the hospital. Yuke's condition was deteriorating faster than expected, and they urged immediate action. Izzy's heart sank. How would he find the money? He couldn't let his son suffer because of his financial struggles. Maybe he should consider borrowing money, even if it meant being in debt for years. He thought about Ada again. Why hadn't she even suggested selling her jewelry or taking out a loan? Later that evening, Izzy arrived home to find Ada cooking dinner. The aroma of fried plantains and stew filled the air, but Izzy couldn't enjoy it. He was too consumed by worry. "Ada, we need to talk," he said, his tone firm. She turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. About what? About Yuke. The hospital called. They said he doesn't have much time. We need to act now. Ada nodded but said nothing. Izzy clenched his fists. You can't just stand there and do nothing. I'm working myself to the bone, and you just act like this isn't happening. Ada's hands trembled slightly as she stirred the pot. I'm doing what I can, Izzy. You don't understand. Then help me understand, he shouted, his voice echoing through the small apartment. Ada turned off the stove and faced him, her eyes glistening. I don't have the answers you're looking for. I can't help, not the way you want me to. Izzy stared at her, his chest heaving. There was something in her eyes, something she wasn't saying. But before he could press her further, Yuke's weak voice called out from his room. Papa, Mama. They both rushed to his side, their argument forgotten for the moment. Yuke smiled faintly as they sat by his bed. Don't fight, he murmured. Izzy held his son's hand tightly, blinking back tears. We're not fighting, my boy. We're just worried about you. Ada sat on the other side, stroking Yuke's hair. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Izzy glanced at her, a flicker of suspicion forming in his mind. After Yuke fell asleep, Izzy watched as Ada quietly left the room. She went to their bedroom and locked the door behind her. Izzy's curiosity got the better of him. He crept to the door and listened. Inside, Ada's muffled voice spoke hurriedly, as though on a phone call. He couldn't make out the words, but her tone was serious. Who was she talking to? And why did she seem so different when she thought no one was watching? That night, as Ada slept, Izzy searched through her drawers, hoping to find answers. His hands trembled as he opened a small wooden box tucked in the back of the closet. Inside was a stack of papers, property deeds, bank statements, and business documents. One name stood out on every page. Ada Investments. Izzy froze. The truth was beginning to unravel, and it was more shocking than anything he could have imagined. Izzy sat on the edge of the bed, the papers spread out before him like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The name Ada Investments jumped out at him repeatedly, along with jaw-dropping numbers. Millions of dollars in bank accounts, ownership of luxury properties, and shares in some of the city's most prominent businesses. It felt surreal. His Ada, his quiet, modest wife, was the owner of an empire he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He stared at the bank statements, the zeros blurring before his eyes. How could she have hidden this from him for so long? But the most pressing question gnawed at his mind. Why? The next morning, Izzy couldn't bring himself to confront Ada directly. He watched her as she prepared Yuke's breakfast, moving around the kitchen with the same gentle grace she always had. She hummed softly under her breath, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. Ada, he finally said, keeping his voice steady, can you tell me more about your family? Your past? Ada paused, her hand gripping the edge of the counter. Why do you ask? Just curious, Izzy replied, trying to sound casual. You never talk much about where you came from. She smiled faintly, but there was a hint of tension in her eyes. There's not much to tell. My parents passed when I was young. I moved to Aurelia to start fresh, and the rest, as they say, is history. Izzy nodded, but her words only deepened his suspicions. She wasn't lying outright, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. He needed answers, and he decided to get them another way. That evening, after finishing his second job, Izzy made a detour to the business district. He stood outside the glass-walled headquarters of Ada Investments, feeling out of place in his delivery uniform. He had found the address on one of the papers in Ada's box. The building loomed over him, a towering testament to wealth and power. A polished gold plaque near the entrance bore the name, Ada Investments, Ltd. Taking a deep breath, Izzy stepped inside. The air was cool, and the faint hum of activity filled the space. People in expensive suits hurried past, their conversations buzzing with terms he didn't understand. Can I help you, sir? A young receptionist asked, eyeing him curiously. Yes, Izzy said, his voice wavering slightly. I'm looking for Ada. She works here. The receptionist raised an eyebrow. Do you mean Mrs. Ada Equim, the CEO? The title hit him like a punch to the gut. CEO? Izzy's mind raced as he tried to process the revelation. Before he could respond, the receptionist continued, "I'm afraid Mrs. Aquim isn't in the office today. Do you have an appointment?" Izzy shook his head, muttering a quick thank you before leaving. He needed time to think. Later that night, Izzy lay awake in bed, his thoughts spinning like a whirlwind. Next to him, Ada slept soundly, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the streetlights filtering through the window. How could she live this double life so effortlessly? The following day, Izzy decided to follow her. It wasn't something he ever thought he'd do, but the need for answers overpowered his guilt. After Ada dropped Yuke off at school, she didn't return home. Instead, she drove to an upscale part of the city. Izzy trailed behind her on his old motorcycle, keeping a safe distance. Ada parked outside a high-end boutique, where a doorman greeted her by name. She stepped inside, her demeanor shifting. Gone was the humble, soft-spoken woman Izzy had always known. In her place stood someone confident and commanding. Izzy waited for over an hour before she emerged. This time, she wasn't alone. A tall man in a tailored suit walked beside her, carrying a briefcase. They spoke animatedly, and Ada laughed, a sound Izzy hadn't heard from her in months. His stomach churned. Who was this man? And what kind of life was Ada living when she wasn't with him and Yuke? When Ada returned home that evening, Izzy was waiting. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Fine," she replied, setting her purse on the table. "Same as usual. I just ran a few errands." Izzy stared at her, his frustration boiling over. "Errands? Huh? Like running an empire? Meeting with business associates? Or laughing with a man I've never seen before?" Ada froze, her eyes widening. "What are you talking about?" "I followed you today," Izzy admitted, his voice breaking. "I know everything, Ada. I know about Ada Investments. I know you're rich. I know you've been lying to me this whole time." Her face paled, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, she sighed deeply, sinking into the nearest chair. "Izzy, it's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," he demanded. "Why are you pretending to be someone you're not? Why are you letting me work myself to death while you hide behind this lie? And our son, Ada, our son is dying. How can you stay silent when you have the means to save him?" Tears welled up in Ada's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "You don't understand," she said softly. "It's not that simple." "Make me understand," Izzy pressed, his voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Because right now, all I see is betrayal." Ada looked at him, her expression torn. For the first time, he saw a flicker of vulnerability behind her composed facade. "I can't explain everything," she whispered. "Not yet. But you have to trust me." "Trust you?" Izzy laughed bitterly. "You've been lying to me for years. How can I trust you?" Ada stood, her shoulders squared. "Because I've always done what I believed was best for this family. And I'll keep doing it, whether you understand or not." With that, she walked past him and locked herself in the bedroom, leaving Izzy alone with his thoughts. He stared at the closed door, his fists clenched. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the secrets Ada was keeping, or the realization that he might not truly know the woman he had married. Days passed, but the tension between Ada and Izzy didn't ease. They barely spoke, their interactions limited to brief exchanges about Yuke or household matters. But the strain in the air was palpable, and Yuke, despite his weakened state, seemed to notice. "Papa, are you and Mama mad at each other?" Yuke asked one evening as Izzy helped him with his dinner. Izzy forced a smile. "No, my boy. Mama and I are just worried about you." Yuke frowned, his small fingers gripping his spoon. "I don't like it when you don't talk. It makes me feel sad." Izzy's heart broke at his son's words. He wanted to tell Yuke that everything would be fine, but the truth was, things were spiraling out of control. That week, Yuke's health took a sharp turn for the worse. He became lethargic, barely able to get out of bed. His once bright, curious eyes were now sunken and dim. The doctors called Izzy in for an urgent meeting. "Mr. Izzy," the lead doctor said gravely, "Yuke's condition is critical. His kidney function is almost non-existent, and we're seeing signs of organ failure. He needs the transplant immediately." Izzy's stomach churned. I don't have the money yet. I'm working on it, but..." The doctor held up a hand. I understand your situation, but time is running out. Without surgery, he may not survive the month. Izzy walked out of the hospital in a daze, the doctor's words ringing in his ears. He may not survive the month. That night, Izzy finally broke. He confronted Ada once again, his emotions spilling over like a dam that had finally burst. Ada, our son is dying, he shouted, pacing the living room while she sat silently on the couch. How can you sit there and do nothing? I know you have the money. Ada, why won't you help him? Ada looked up at him, her face a mask of calm, though her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. I'm doing what I believe is right, she said softly. Right? Izzy's voice rose. How is letting our child suffer the right thing to do? Tell me, Ada, what are you so afraid of? Ada stood, her expression hardening. You think this is easy for me? You think I don't want to help him? Her voice cracked, and for a moment, Izzy thought she might finally tell him the truth. But then she turned away, her shoulders trembling. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Izzy shouted, his frustration boiling over. Ada spun around, her eyes blazing. Do you think money solves everything, Izzy? Do you think throwing cash at the problem will fix what's broken? Yes. Izzy snapped. When it comes to saving our son's life, yes, money solves the problem. But you'd rather watch him die than let go of your precious secret. You're selfish, Ada. Selfish and cruel. The words hung in the air like a slap. Ada's face crumpled, and she turned and fled to their bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Izzy sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. He felt lost, powerless, and utterly betrayed. The next day, Ada left the house early, as she often did. But this time, Izzy didn't follow her. He didn't have the energy. Instead, he focused on Yuke, who had grown weaker overnight. Papa, Yuke whispered as Izzy sat by his bed, holding his small hand. Yes, my boy? Are you and Mama going to fix it? Yuke asked, his voice barely audible. Fix what? Whatever's wrong. I know something is wrong. Yuke's eyes filled with tears. I don't want you and Mama to fight. Izzy blinked back his own tears, brushing Yuke's hair from his face. Don't worry about that, my boy. Just rest. Papa will take care of everything. But as Izzy watched Yuke drift into a restless sleep, he knew he was lying. He wasn't sure how much more he could take. That evening, as Izzy washed the dishes, he noticed something odd. Ada's handbag, which she usually took with her everywhere, was sitting on the kitchen counter. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened it and found her phone inside, along with a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a check, written in Ada's name, for an amount that made Izzy's jaw drop. It was enough to cover not only Yuke's surgery but years of aftercare. But what truly shocked him was the recipient's name, St. Mary's Orphanage. What is this? Izzy muttered, staring at the check. Why was Ada planning to donate such a huge amount to an orphanage while refusing to help her own son? Before he could process what he was seeing, Ada walked in. She froze when she saw the check in his hand. Izzy, she said slowly, her voice trembling. Put that down. What is this, Ada? Izzy demanded, holding up the check. Why are you giving money to an orphanage when our son needs it more? It's complicated, Ada replied, her tone defensive. Stop saying that. Izzy shouted, his voice echoing through the apartment. Stop hiding behind excuses. Tell me the truth, Ada. Why won't you help Yuke? Ada's lips quivered, and for a moment, Izzy thought she might finally break. But instead, she grabbed the check from his hand and tore it in half. Don't ask me again, she said quietly, her voice hollow. Izzy stared at her, his heart pounding. He didn't know who this woman was anymore, but one thing was clear. He couldn't rely on her to save their son. Izzy barely slept that night, his mind plagued with questions. Why was Ada so willing to give away such an enormous amount to strangers while ignoring their son's life-threatening condition? And what was she hiding? The more he thought about it, the clearer it became that he couldn't wait for Ada to change her mind. If she wouldn't act, then he would. The next morning, Izzy made a decision. He would approach every avenue possible to save Yuke's life, even if it meant swallowing his pride. He began by visiting friends and colleagues, asking if they could lend him money. Most of them sympathized with his plight, but couldn't help financially. The little they could spare wouldn't come close to covering the surgery. Izzy was turned away so many times that he stopped counting. His last stop was his former boss, Mr. Uche, a wealthy businessman known for his sharp tongue and even sharper business tactics. Izzy hesitated before knocking on the man's office door. "Come in," a gruff voice called. Izzy entered, clutching his cap nervously. Mr. Uche sat behind a massive oak desk, his piercing eyes scanning Izzy from head to toe. "What brings you here, Izzy?" Izzy swallowed hard. "Sir, I need your help. My son is critically ill and needs a kidney transplant. I've tried everything, but I can't afford the surgery. I was hoping you might lend me the money." Mr. Uche leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "A kidney transplant? That's not small money. Why should I risk that amount on you?" "I'll pay you back," Izzy promised, his voice shaking. "I'll work for you day and night, for as long as it takes. I just need a chance." The older man stared at him for a long moment before sighing. "I've seen men in your position before, Izzy. Desperation makes people say anything. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you the money." Izzy's heart leapt. "Thank you, sir." Mr. Uche held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. There's a condition. I'll loan you the money, but if you can't repay me within 2 years, I'll take the deeds to whatever property you own." Izzy froze. He didn't own much, just their modest apartment, but it was all his family had. Still, Yuke's life was on the line. What choice did he have? "I'll do it," he said firmly. Mr. Uche smirked. "Good. My assistant will draw up the paperwork. Don't disappoint me, Izzy." Izzy left the office feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. He had the money now, but the cost of failure loomed over him like a dark cloud. That evening, he informed Ada about the loan. "You did what?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I had no choice," Izzy replied. "Yuke doesn't have time, and you've made it clear you won't help." Ada's face hardened. "You don't understand what you've done, Izzy. This isn't just about money." "Then tell me." Izzy exploded. "Tell me why you're so determined to keep your wealth a secret while our son is dying." Ada shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't." "Then don't stop me from doing what needs to be done," Izzy said coldly. The next few days were a whirlwind. Izzy arranged for Yuke's transfer to a specialized hospital abroad, using the loan to cover the travel and medical costs. Watching his son being wheeled onto the plane was bittersweet. "We're going to make you better, my boy," Izzy whispered, kissing Yuke's forehead before the nurses took him away. Ada had insisted on staying behind, claiming she needed to handle other matters. Izzy didn't argue. He was too exhausted to care about her excuses anymore. While Yuke underwent the first stages of his treatment, Izzy received an unexpected call. "Mr. Izzy," a deep voice said. "My name is Detective Fola. I believe we need to talk about your wife, Ada Equim." Izzy's blood ran cold. "What about her?" "I think it's better if we discuss this in person. Can you meet me at the station tomorrow morning?" Izzy's mind raced as he hung up the phone. What could the police possibly want with Ada? The next day, Izzy sat across from Detective Fola in a stark interrogation room. "I'm not sure why I'm here," Izzy began, his nerves on edge. The detective slid a folder across the table. "Mr. Izzy, are you aware that your wife has connections to some questionable individuals?" Izzy frowned. "What do you mean?" "Over the past few years, we've been investigating a network of high-profile businesspeople involved in money laundering and illegal offshore accounts. Your wife, Ada Equim, is one of them." Izzy's heart pounded. "That's impossible. Ada isn't involved in anything like that. She's just a wealthy businesswoman," the detective finished. "Yes, on the surface. But where do you think all that wealth comes from? We have reason to believe Ada's success isn't as legitimate as it seems." Izzy stared at the folder, his mind reeling. Could this be why Ada had kept her fortune a secret? "You're wrong," Izzy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ada isn't a criminal." Detective Fola leaned forward, his expression serious. "If you know anything that could help us, now is the time to speak up. Otherwise, when the truth comes out, it might be too late for you to claim innocence." Izzy left the station feeling as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. His wife, A secret billionaire and possibly a criminal? It didn't make sense. But the pieces were starting to come together, and Izzy didn't like the picture they painted. Back at home, Izzy confronted Ada once more. "I spoke to the police today," he said, his voice low but laced with anger. Ada froze. "What did they say?" "They think you're involved in something illegal. Money laundering, offshore accounts. Is it true, Ada? Is that where all your wealth comes from?" Ada's face crumpled, and for the first time, she seemed to lose her composure. "Izzy, I didn't want you to find out like this." "So, it is true?" he asked, his voice shaking. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Everything I've done, it was to protect us. To protect Yuke." Her words left Izzy more confused than ever. Protect them? How could something so wrong ever be right? For the first time, Izzy wondered if saving Yuke might come at a price far greater than he had ever imagined. The air in the room felt heavy as Ada's confession hung between them. Izzy's mind raced with questions, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "To protect us?" he echoed, his voice tight. "What does that even mean, Ada? Don't speak in riddles. I need to know the truth. All of it now." Ada sat down, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. She looked up at Izzy, her face pale and drawn. "Izzy, I've been living a lie, but it's not what you think." "Then explain," Izzy demanded. Ada drew in a shaky breath. "Years ago, before we met, I was married to another man. His name was Chike. He was older than me, wealthy, and dangerous. I didn't love him, but he gave me a life of luxury. He controlled everything, my money, my decisions, my freedom." Izzy's brow furrowed. This wasn't what he had expected to hear. "What happened to him?" Ada looked away, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Chike died, but his death wasn't natural. It was a business deal gone wrong. A lot of powerful people were involved, and after he was gone, they came after me. They thought I knew too much about his operations." She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I ran, Izzy. I left everything behind. His businesses, his money, his connections. I changed my name and tried to start over. But his wealth, it followed me. His assets were legally transferred to me after his death, and no matter how much I've tried to distance myself, it's like a shadow I can't escape." Izzy stared at her, struggling to process her words. "So all of this, your wealth, your businesses, it's tied to your first husband?" "Yes," Ada admitted, her voice trembling. "I never wanted it, Izzy. I wanted a simple life, a fresh start. That's why I kept it from you. I didn't want you or Yuke to get dragged into that world." "Dragged into what world?" Izzy asked, his voice rising. "You're talking about this like it's some kind of curse. But you have all this money, Ada. Money that could save Yuke's life. Why won't you use it?" Ada's hands clenched into fists. "Because if I do, they'll find me." "Who?" Izzy asked, his frustration mounting. "The people Chike worked with," Ada replied, her voice barely audible. "They've been watching me, waiting for me to slip up. If I start moving large amounts of money, they'll know I'm alive. They'll come for me. And for you and Yuke." Izzy sank into a chair, his mind spinning. The story sounded like something out of a crime novel, but the fear in Ada's eyes was real. He didn't know whether to believe her or to accuse her of spinning yet another web of lies. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" he asked finally. "I wanted to," Ada said, her voice breaking. "But how could I? I was trying to protect you, Izzy. The less you knew, the safer you were." Izzy ran a hand through his hair, his emotions warring within him. On one hand, he could see the logic in her actions. On the other, her secrecy had cost their family dearly, especially Yuke. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice flat. "Do we just sit back and hope Yuke makes it without your help? Or do we finally take a risk and do what's necessary to save our son?" Ada looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. "There's one way," she said hesitantly. "What way?" Izzy asked, leaning forward. "There's a man I know," Ada said. "He was one of Chike's associates, but he's different. He left that life behind, just like I did. If anyone can help us move the money discreetly, it's him. But reaching out to him is dangerous." Izzy's jaw tightened. Dangerous or not, we don't have a choice. If this is the only way to save Yuk, then we do it. The next day, Ada made the call. Her hands shook as she dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest. Hello? A deep voice answered. It's me, Ada said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause. Then the man spoke again. Ada, is this really you? Yes, she replied. I need your help, Obinna. A week later, Obinna arrived in the city. He was tall and imposing, with an air of authority that made Izzy uneasy. The three of them met in a secluded cafe, far from prying eyes. I never thought I'd hear from you again, Obinna said, studying Ada intently. After everything that happened with Chaik, I assumed you disappeared for good. I tried, Ada replied. But now I need your help. My son is dying, and I need to access the money without drawing attention. Obinna leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You're asking for a lot, Ada. Moving that kind of money quietly isn't easy. And if Chaik's old partners catch wind of it, he trailed off, his meaning clear. I'll take the risk, Ada said firmly. Obinna glanced at Izzy, then back at Ada. Does he know everything? Yes, Ada said. He's my husband. I trust him. Obinna nodded. All right, I'll help you. But you need to be ready for the consequences. Once this starts, there's no turning back. Later that night, as they returned home, Izzy couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a storm. Ada seemed calm, but he could see the tension in her eyes. Are you sure about this? He asked her as they sat together in the living room. No, she admitted. But I'll do whatever it takes to save Yuk, even if it means facing my past. Izzy reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Despite everything, he realized he still loved her, and he couldn't let her face this alone. We'll get through this, he said, his voice steady. Together. But as they sat in silence, both of them knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Obinna had warned Ada and Izzy that moving such a significant amount of money would require precision and secrecy. Even the smallest mistake could draw the attention of Chaik's former associates, who had been watching the accounts for years. Once we start, Obinna explained during a late-night meeting at their home, we'll have a narrow window to complete the transfer and erase any trace of the transaction. You'll need to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. Izzy nodded, though his unease was growing by the minute. He wasn't used to dealing with men like Obinna, smooth, calculating, and clearly experienced in navigating dangerous waters. But as long as this plan could save Yuk, he had no choice but to cooperate. The night of the transfer arrived. Ada sat in front of her laptop, her fingers trembling as she logged into the account that held the bulk of her fortune. Izzy stood behind her, his jaw clenched tightly. Obinna paced the room, issuing quiet instructions. We'll break the transfer into smaller chunks, Obinna said. It'll take a few hours, but it's the safest way to avoid raising red flags. Ada, are you ready? Ada hesitated, her cursor hovering over the screen. For a moment, her mind flashed back to the day she inherited the account. Chaik's cold, lifeless body had barely been buried when his lawyers handed her the details, as though his death was nothing more than a transaction. Ada, Izzy said softly, bringing her back to the present. It's for Yuk. She took a deep breath and nodded. Let's do it. The first transfer went smoothly, as did the second and third. But as the hours ticked by, Ada's nerves frayed. Every time she clicked send, she imagined someone on the other end noticing, tracking her, and coming for her family. Almost done, Obinna said, his eyes glued to the monitor. Just one more transfer to go. Suddenly, Ada's laptop screen froze. What's happening? She asked, her voice rising in panic. Obinna leaned over, frowning. It's a security lockout. The system must have flagged the activity as unusual. Izzy's heart sank. What does that mean? Can they trace it? Obinna didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. I'll try to override it, but this might have alerted someone. We need to move fast. Ada's phone buzzed, and she jumped. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Don't answer that, Obinna said sharply. But the phone kept ringing, the sound cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Finally, it stopped, only to buzz again moments later. Who would be calling at this hour? Izzy asked, his voice tight. Someone we don't want to talk to, Obina muttered. As Obina worked to regain access to the account, Izzy stepped out of the room to check on Yuke. The boy was asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. Izzy knelt by his bedside, stroking his son's hair. Just a little longer, he whispered. We're going to fix this. I promise. But as he returned to the living room, he found Ada staring at her phone, her face pale. What is it? Izzy asked, dread pooling in his stomach. They sent a message, Ada said, her voice shaking. She held up the phone, and Izzy read the text. We know. Stop now, or you'll regret it. Obina glanced at the message, his expression hardening. They're bluffing. Keep going. We're almost done. But Ada hesitated. What if they're not bluffing? What if they're already watching us? They've been watching you for years, Obina said. This is just a scare tactic to make you back off. Don't let them win. Izzy placed a hand on Ada's shoulder. We've come this far. Yuke doesn't have time, Ada. We have to finish this. Ada looked between her husband and Obina, her mind racing. Finally, she nodded, her determination returning. Let's finish it. Obina managed to bypass the security lockout, and the final transfer went through without a hitch. As the confirmation screen appeared, a wave of relief washed over the room. It's done, Obina said, leaning back in his chair. Izzy let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank God. Ada closed the laptop, her hands still trembling. Now what? Now, Obina said. You wait. The money will reach the hospital's account within the hour. But you need to be careful. If they suspect you've moved the money, he didn't finish the sentence, but they all knew what he meant. True to Obina's word, the hospital confirmed the receipt of the funds an hour later. Izzy wasted no time booking the surgery for Yuke, who was flown to the operating room the following day. As Izzy watched the doctors wheel his son away, he felt a mixture of hope and fear. They had done everything they could. Now, it was up to fate and the surgeons. Meanwhile, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The text message lingered in her mind, its ominous tone haunting her every thought. She was right to be worried. Late that night, as she and Izzy sat in the hospital waiting room, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was even more chilling. You've made a big mistake. We're coming for you. Ada's breath caught in her throat. She showed the message to Izzy, who immediately called Obina. They're trying to scare you, Obina said over the phone. Lay low for now. I'll see what I can find out. But deep down, Ada knew this wasn't just a scare tactic. She had crossed a line, and there would be consequences. As the hours dragged on, the tension grew unbearable. When the surgeon finally emerged from the operating room, Izzy and Ada jumped to their feet. How is he? Izzy asked, his voice trembling. The surgeon smiled. The surgery was a success. Your son is stable, but he'll need close monitoring and rehabilitation. Relief flooded through Izzy and Ada as they embraced. Yuke was safe, for now. But as they looked at each other, they both knew that their troubles were far from over. The shadow of Ada's past was closing in, and this time, it wasn't just her life on the line. It was their entire families. The news that Yuke's surgery had been successful provided a brief moment of peace, but neither Ada nor Izzy could shake the uneasy feeling that hung in the air like a storm cloud. The text messages had become more frequent, and each one carried a threat that made Ada's blood run cold. As they sat together in the hospital room, Ada's mind raced. Her phone had buzzed again, and this time, it was from an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, she opened it, bracing herself for the worst. You can't hide forever. We know where you are. You'll regret this. Izzy saw the color drain from her face as she read the message. Ada, who's this from? It's them, she whispered, her voice trembling. Chike's associates. They know what we've done. Izzy's grip tightened around her hand. This is insane. You said they were dangerous, but they can't just show up and… Before he could finish, there was a knock at the door. Ada's heart skipped a beat. She stood, trying to steady herself, but Izzy placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. Stay here, he said, his voice low. I'll answer it. Izzy opened the door cautiously. A man in a dark suit stood in the hallway, his face unreadable. "Can I help you?" Izzy asked, his voice guarded. The man didn't smile, didn't speak. Instead, he handed Izzy a small envelope. "This is for Mrs. Ada. Please make sure she gets it." Izzy hesitated, taking the envelope from the man. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway before Izzy could say anything more. Ada's breath caught as Izzy returned, holding the envelope. "What is it?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," Izzy said. "Let's find out." Inside the envelope was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. As Ada unfolded it, she found a message written in clean, precise handwriting. "You've made your move. Now we'll make ours. Say goodbye to your son." Ada felt her blood run cold. The words blurred before her eyes. She couldn't breathe. "Who are these people, Ada?" Izzy demanded, his voice rising with panic. "What do they want? Why are they threatening you?" I don't know," Ada whispered, her hands trembling. "I've been trying to escape them for so long, but now they know where we are. They know everything." Izzy's mind raced. The fear in Ada's eyes was real. They were dealing with something far beyond just money now. These were dangerous people, and their threats weren't empty. "Stay calm," Izzy said, taking her hand. "We'll get through this. We'll go to the police." "No," Ada replied, her voice urgent. "We can't go to the police. If they find out we've contacted them, it'll make things worse. I don't want to put you in more danger." Izzy struggled to understand. "What do you want to do then? Just let them take over?" "No," Ada said, her voice firm. "I need to handle this my way. The way I should have done all along." Later that night, as the hospital quieted down, Ada slipped away from Izzy's watchful gaze. She needed answers. She needed to confront her past before it destroyed everything she had fought so hard to rebuild. She made her way to a small, hidden office on the outskirts of the city, a place she had frequented during her time with Chike's associates. The walls were lined with old photographs, mementos from a life she had tried to bury. As she entered the room, a familiar face turned toward her. A man named Tund, one of Chike's old lieutenants. His face had aged since the last time she saw him, but his cold, calculating eyes hadn't changed. "Ada," he said, his voice low. "I didn't expect you to come back." "I didn't have a choice," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I need your help, Tund." Tund raised an eyebrow. "Help? You've got the money, Ada. You've got everything you could want. But you're still here, still running. What's the problem?" "I made a deal," Ada said, keeping her voice even. "A deal I never should have made. Chike's death wasn't an accident, and now his old partners are coming after me. They're threatening my son." Tund's eyes narrowed. "So that's what this is about. The kid." "Yes," Ada said, her voice tinged with desperation. "Please, Tund. I need to know how to protect my family. How to get them off my back before it's too late." Tund leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "You were always too soft for this life, Ada. That's why you ran." He paused, then spoke again. "But there's a way out. There's always a way out, if you're willing to pay the price." Ada swallowed hard. "What price?" Tund smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was a grim, knowing look. "You'll have to make them believe you're no longer a threat. You'll have to give them something they want." Ada's heart raced. "What do they want?" "The same thing they've always wanted," Tund said. "Control, power, money. They'll want you to come back into the fold, to work for them again. But this time, it won't be about the money, Ada. It'll be about loyalty. You'll have to prove you're with them, no matter what." Ada stared at Tund, the weight of his words sinking in. "And if I don't?" Tund's expression darkened. "Then they'll come for your son. They'll come for everything you've built. And you won't be able to stop them." Back at the hospital, Izzy sat in the waiting room, staring at the clock. Hours had passed since Ada left, and he had no idea where she was or what she was doing. He paced nervously, his mind racing. Every possible scenario ran through his head, each one worse than the last. Just as he was about to go looking for her, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Ada. "I've made a deal, but we need to leave the city now." Izzy's heart skipped a beat. Was this really it? Had Ada finally confronted her past? And if so, what deal had she made? The phone buzzed again, this time with another message. I'll explain everything, but we need to go. Trust me. Izzy swallowed hard. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. Ada had stepped back into the world she had tried to escape, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences would catch up to them. Ada's past was coming for her, and for Izzy and Yuke, there would be no hiding from it. The clock was ticking. The tension in the air seemed almost suffocating as Izzy stared at the message on his phone. Ada had made a deal, but he couldn't understand why she hadn't told him more. What had she done? Was this the only way to protect their son? He quickly stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no time to waste. He had to find Ada and figure out what was happening. He glanced at Yuke's bed, where his son lay still, peacefully sleeping after his surgery. He was safe for now, but for how long? As he rushed down the hospital corridor, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message from Ada. It was from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "This is Izzy," he said, his voice strained. A cold, familiar voice responded. "Izzy, long time no speak. How's the family?" Izzy's blood ran cold. The voice belonged to Tund, one of Chike's former associates. The same man who Ada had gone to see just hours ago. "I don't have time for games, Tund. What's going on?" Izzy's voice was tight with anger and fear. Tund laughed softly. "Oh, I'm not playing games, Izzy. But your wife, well, she's trying to make a deal with the devil, isn't she? You should be careful, my friend. These things never end well." Izzy clenched his jaw. "I don't know what you're talking about. What have you done to her? Where is she?" Tund didn't respond immediately. There was silence on the other end. Then he spoke again, his voice dripping with amusement. "You'll find her soon enough, but before you do, I want you to understand one thing, Izzy. Ada made a choice, and now she has to live with it. If you try to stop us, you'll lose more than just her. You'll lose everything." Izzy felt a chill run down his spine. "If you touch her or my son, I swear." "Calm down," Tund interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "We're not interested in hurting your precious family yet, but you should know that Ada is in too deep now. She's made her bed, and she'll have to lie in it." The line went dead, and Izzy stood there, his hands trembling. The weight of Tund's words hit him like a punch to the gut. Ada had made a deal, and now she was part of a world that Izzy couldn't even comprehend. What did this mean for their future? Hours passed before Izzy finally got a call from Ada. His phone rang in the stillness of the hospital room, and he snatched it up, his heart racing. "Ada," he breathed. "Where are you? What happened? You need to come back." But the voice on the other end wasn't the familiar one he had hoped for. It was cold, emotionless. "Izzy, it's me. I'm doing this for us. For Yuke. Just trust me." Izzy's stomach churned. "Ada, what do you mean? What's going on? I need to know the truth." "I can't explain everything right now," Ada's voice faltered. "But I've done what needed to be done. Tund, he's been helping me. I had no choice, Izzy. You have to believe me." Izzy's head spun. "Ada, no, you can't trust him. You can't trust any of them. We've been running from this life, and now you've stepped right back into it. What have you done?" "I did it for Yuke, Izzy." "For him?" Ada's voice cracked, and Izzy could hear her fighting back tears. "I had to make them believe that I'm on their side, or they would have taken him. They would have hurt him, or worse. Please understand." Izzy could hardly breathe, his heart pounding in his chest. "Ada, no, this isn't right. You've put us all in danger. I don't know who you're dealing with anymore." "I'm sorry," Ada whispered. "I'm so sorry, but I don't have a choice. I'm coming back to you, but we need to leave the city. We need to disappear." Izzy stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. What about the money? What about the deal? "I'll handle it," Ada replied, "but we can't stay here any longer. I'm going to do everything I can to fix this. I swear." Izzy could hear the determination in her voice, but it did little to calm his growing panic. He didn't know if he could trust her anymore, if he could trust anyone in this mess. But one thing was certain. Their lives had been irrevocably changed. The future he had imagined for their family was slipping away, and in its place, A nightmare was unfolding. Later that night, Ada returned to the hospital. She entered their room cautiously, her eyes scanning the quiet space before settling on Izzy. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her expression tense. Izzy didn't wait for her to speak. "Where's the money, Ada? What have you agreed to?" Ada closed the door behind her, stepping further into the room. She hesitated for a moment before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. "I transferred everything, Izzy. All of it." Izzy's heart sank. "Everything? Why? Why would you do that?" Ada met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "Because they told me they would hurt you. They would hurt you. And I couldn't risk that. The money isn't worth our lives, Izzy. You have to understand that." Izzy swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. This wasn't the woman he had married, the woman who had fought so hard to escape the shadows of her past. This was someone different, someone who had been forced to make impossible choices. But in the midst of his anger, a part of him understood. This was the world Ada had come from, a world where the stakes were higher than they could ever imagine. "Then what do we do now?" Izzy asked, his voice low. "We can't just run forever, Ada. We can't hide." "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but I'm not giving up on us. I won't let them take you away from me. I won't let them take you." Izzy looked at her, his heart heavy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "Then we fight. Whatever it takes, we fight." But as they embraced, neither of them knew just how deep they were now entangled in the web of lies, danger, and deceit. Their past had caught up with them, and the future was no longer something they could plan. The threat wasn't just from Ada's former life anymore. It was from a shadowy underworld that could strike at any moment, a world that no one could escape unscathed. And as the night wore on, Ada and Izzy realized that escaping their past might be the hardest battle they would ever face. But they were willing to do anything to protect their son. They had made a dangerous choice, and now they would have to live with its consequences. The following days were a blur of preparations, tense phone calls, and secret meetings. Ada and Izzy had decided to leave the city. They couldn't afford to stay in one place for long. The threat was too real. With Yuke still recovering from his surgery, every step they took felt like a race against time, as if something was constantly lurking behind them, waiting to pounce. Ada had contacted some old allies, people she hoped would help them disappear. It was strange, really, how her past had come back to haunt her in such a profound way. She'd spent so many years running, trying to outrun the consequences of her decisions, and now, in a cruel twist of fate, the past was catching up with her in a way she couldn't ignore. Izzy hadn't fully processed the extent of the danger. He was still in shock. The world Ada had come from, the world he had only heard whispers about, was darker and more complex than he had ever imagined. Ada's reluctance to share the full truth, her secrecy, had only fueled his growing fears. One evening, as they packed up what little they could take with them, Izzy sat down on the edge of their bed. Ada was going through their documents, organizing their passports, the essentials. He watched her for a moment, taking in the exhaustion that clung to her. The woman he knew, the woman who had loved him, who had promised they'd face everything together, was slipping away from him. The woman standing before him was someone entirely different, someone whose past had been shaped by forces he didn't understand. "Ada," he said softly, breaking the silence, "I need you to tell me everything. No more secrets. Please." Ada paused, her hands stilling on the papers. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite read. "I wish I could, Izzy. I wish I could tell you everything, but it's not that simple. If I tell you everything, you'll be in danger too. I can't risk that." Izzy stood up and walked toward her, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm already in danger. So is Yuke. We're all in this together, Ada. Whatever your past is, it's part of our future now. You can't shut me out." A long silence stretched between them. Ada bit her lip, clearly torn. She finally sighed, sitting down on the bed beside him. "You're right," she said quietly. "I should have told you sooner. But I didn't want to bring you into this world. I didn't want you to see what I've been involved in. But now, it's too late for that." She took a deep breath before continuing. "When I was younger, I got mixed up with Chike and his associates. I was naive. I thought I could control the situation. I thought I could leave it all behind. But it's never that easy. Chike ran a powerful underground empire, and I was part of it. We had businesses in real estate, finance, and several illegal operations. I was the one who handled the money, laundering, investments, making sure everything stayed hidden. It was dangerous, but I thought I could protect myself. I thought I could leave it all behind. Izzy listened, stunned by her confession. He had suspected there was more to her past, but hearing the truth was like a slap to his face. He had no idea that his wife had been involved in something so dark. It was a world far removed from the person he had married, the loving mother of their child. I thought I could start fresh, Ada continued, her voice trembling, but Chike's death changed everything. His associates, Tund and the others, were always watching me. And when I tried to leave, when I tried to move on, they made it clear that there was no escaping them. They made me an offer. Either I returned to the fold, or they would take everything I loved. Izzy could feel the weight of her words settle on his chest. So that's why you made the deal. You thought it was the only way to protect us. Ada nodded, her eyes wet with unshed tears. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now I don't know. I don't know if I can trust them. I don't know if I can trust myself. Izzy reached out, taking her hands in his. We'll figure this out, Ada. We'll get through this together. We'll find a way to make them leave us alone. Ada shook her head, her face filled with sorrow. It's not that simple. Tund and the others, they're not just going to let us go. They'll keep coming after us. They'll keep pulling us deeper into their world until there's no way out. And I don't know if I can protect you, Izzy. I don't know if I can protect you. Izzy was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice full of resolve, he said, We're not running anymore. We're facing this head on. If you've made a deal with them, then we'll find a way to use it. We'll play by their rules, but we're going to make sure we're in control. No more hiding. Ada looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. You're willing to risk it all? Izzy squeezed her hands, his voice firm. I'm willing to risk everything. For you. For Yuke. We're in this together. The next few days passed in a haze of activity. They left the hospital, taking Yuke with them to an undisclosed location. They couldn't stay in the city any longer, not with the threat looming over them. Izzy arranged for a car to take them to a safe house in the outskirts of the country, a place where they could lay low and figure out their next move. Ada continued to make contact with her old associates, trying to gauge the extent of the danger they were in. She knew that Tund and the others were watching them, waiting for them to slip up. But she also knew that the key to surviving this was to keep moving, to stay one step ahead. Izzy, meanwhile, began researching everything he could about the world Ada had left behind. He learned about Chike's empire, the ruthless network of people who would stop at nothing to maintain control. He studied their tactics, their weaknesses. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever, but if they played their cards right, they might just have a chance. As the days wore on, the pressure began to build. Every phone call, every knock at the door, sent their hearts racing. But they couldn't afford to let fear control them. They had to fight. For their family. For their future. Late one evening, as Izzy sat in the dimly lit living room of their safe house, a knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. Ada looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. I'll get it, Izzy said, rising from his seat. He moved cautiously to the door, his hand on the handle. As he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. Standing in the doorway was Tund.